Greetings from the International Labour Organization and its cooperative unit, where we are marking the centenary of the establishment of the cooperation service, as it was called then. And on this occasion, we have been talking with cooperative leaders, researchers, practitioners from around the world. And today we have the pleasure of hosting Rebecca Harvey, the executive editor of Cooperative News from the UK with us. Hello, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Sima. Thank you so much for having me.
So you're usually on the other side of these interviews, and we are now asking the questions. And if you could tell us a little bit about your background, your studies, how you came about working with cooperatives, and leading up to the work at Cooperative News.
Okay, yeah, as you said, Sim, I'm normally the one asking these questions. It's very odd to be the other side, but I'll do my best. Thank you. So my background is not in cooperatives at all. It's very much on the journalism side. So I studied English and communication at university, and then I worked for a college for disabled students, doing a lot of community and project work there. I worked for a food and drink magazine for a while, and then I wanted to do something slightly more, something that gave something back to communities. And I saw an advert for a position at Co-op News, and I knew about the co-op food shops in the UK, and I knew about some of the smaller worker cooperatives in Manchester, UK, where I live. So there's a big wholesale worker cooperative called Unicorn, which some people may have heard of. So I applied for this job, and I was looking at it, researching, going, oh, it's not just food. Oh, there are housing co-ops. They're accredited. Oh, it was a very eye-opening moment. So this is about eight or 9 years ago. I had no idea about the scale or the scope of the cooperative movement. I had no idea it was outside of the UK. And I think that is symptomatic of the fact that in this country, at least, cooperatives are not widely known. There's a huge communication and education piece that needs to happen in the UK for more people to know about cooperatives, because at the end of the day, they do a lot of good work. They do a huge amount of good work. So I applied for this job at Co-op News, and it was very much on the production side. So I applied, and I got the position of deputy editor. Then about 3 years ago, the former editor left quite unexpectedly, and I got promoted to the role of executive editor. It's been an amazing journey, going from knowing nothing about cooperatives to actually kind of knowing what I'm talking about now. There are so many stories to tell, not just in the UK, but internationally, and obviously not in retail, but in every sector as well. You know, whether you're talking about waste pickers or agricultural cooperatives or energy co-ops or housing or credit unions, every single cooperative has its own unique story to tell. And one of the things that is both a challenge and one of the most exciting things about working for Co-op News is the fact that cooperatives mean so many different things to different people, yet they are all bound by these central values and principles. So, you know, it can depend on the demographic, it can depend on the geography or the politics of where that cooperative sits. But at the end of the day, they're all trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to make the world, or their part of it, a slightly better place.
In fact, you're the 15th executive editor of Cooperative News, and congratulations on your 149th year anniversary. Well, it will be a big one next year, as we will turn 101. Could you tell us a little bit about Co-op News, its structure, relationship to the larger cooperative movement in the UK, but also internationally?
So I get slightly geeky about this. So I think Cooperative News has got a fascinating history, and I'm not going to go into the full history of it because I'll be here for hours, and plenty more people have told this story better than I have. Though what I will say is that, you know, Cooperative News wasn't the first cooperative journal or cooperative newspaper at the time, but at the time it was founded. You know, print media was the mass media of the time, and the cooperative movement in the UK decided that it needed its own cooperative voice, its own outward focusing communication device to connect all these different cooperatives. So when the Rochdale Pioneers were founded, their model was replicated, and there were, I think it was about 1,200 different cooperative retail societies in the UK, you know, by the turn of in the 1900s. Obviously, they've changed quite a lot. A lot of them have merged, a lot of them have taken over, and now in the UK there are about, I think, 18 individual cooperative retail societies, alongside all the other sectors as well. But, you know, retail was the consumer co-op model was the one that really took off in the UK. So at that time, very early on, you know, Co-op News did focus on the UK movement and the retail societies, but it did cover international issues as well. So we covered the first International Cooperative Congress in 1895, and they've got a brilliant past edition. Where Co-op Press is based, our head office in Holyoke House in Manchester is also home to Cooperatives UK, which is the apex body, the Cooperative College, and also the Cooperative Heritage Trust. And the Cooperative Heritage Trust comprises also includes the Cooperative Archive, and in the archive they've got every single edition of Co-op News going back to 1871, and they've got a brilliant illustrated edition of the very first Congress, which is marvelous. And, you know, we also covered the first International Cooperators Day, and we've also got a really strong link with the ILO as well. We covered the cooperative services when it was founded, and we also found out when we were doing a bit of research for the ILO that one of the heads of the cooperative service was a former Co-op News journalist. He was a London officer, which is very, very exciting. So he was Mr. W.G. Lamming, and he was, G.N. Lamming. He was the son of
Goodwin Lamming,
Goodwin Norman Lamming. And his father was the drapery manager of Reading Retail Society in the UK. And there's lots of information about him. And we found some, didn't we, Simon, when we were looking into him? And it turned out...
we wrote it up, and you found some photos of him as well. Yeah, it was a nice connection between the two of us.
You did. No, it was really, really interesting person. So like today we cover obviously both UK cooperatives and cooperatives around the world. And if someone asked me what Co-op News is, my one line is, you know, we're a magazine about cooperatives and for cooperatives. And I think there is an argument, and people have said that, you know, the problem with the cooperative movement is it doesn't cooperate and it doesn't move. And people have said that it's too inward looking. But I do think, and I would argue that, you know, at the same time, there is really, really important for cooperatives to also learn from each other, to actually tell their own stories in a way that others can learn from them. Otherwise, people setting up cooperatives or developing cooperatives or coming across challenges in their cooperatives will be reinventing the wheel every time. And that's not healthy or practical or sustainable in the long term. So in terms of where we are now, you asked about our structure and place within cooperatives. In the UK, we have a combination of organisational members and individual members. A lot of those are still retail societies, but as you know, as technology's developed, we have a lot of online interaction as well, and that's something we are looking to do over the next 6 to 12 months, is actually really involve the international cooperative community in our organisation, in our membership and in our governance, because at the moment that doesn't reflect the whole digital readership side of things. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be involved in news about cooperatives and in cooperative news.
And in fact, in the context of the co-op movement being too insular or inward looking and people not knowing about it, Co-op News does play a role, isn't it? We see the issue behind you, the October 2020 issue. A new media, so you are not only a cooperative yourselves, but also writing on cooperatives, so both in form and content.
Yeah, and I would also say it's not just magazines either. You know, there's a huge, we've done a really interesting article this issue about social media and cooperatives, and because I know there was a campaign a few years ago about, could you turn Twitter into a cooperative? Are there cooperative alternatives?
Right.
Are they alternatives to Zoom? And to, I know Lumio is a fantastic, you know, collaborative tool. But what else can cooperatives do in the form of communication?
Right, and all the emerging platform cooperatives around the world. You're the second editor, woman editor of Co-op News, and you have been thinking and been a part of the thinking around how cooperatives drive or contribute to women economic empowerment and gender equality within their institutional structures. Would you care to share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really, really important when you're thinking about women in cooperatives or gender equality or any kind of cooperative equality question. I think it's important to ask, actually, do they make a difference? And if not, why not? the lowest paid jobs in UK retail are still largely held by women, and a lot of those women juggle part-time work and traditional caring responsibilities. And then of those 18 or so retail societies that I mentioned, only 3 have got female chief executives. I mean, the whole executive level may be more balanced, and that's great, and the boards may be balanced and really like diverse in terms of gender or ethnicity or different abilities, and that's fine. But it's very, very difficult. And then there are also examples when the cooperative model can hinder or at least make very little difference to gender equality, and that also needs to be addressed, and especially when you look at wider economic context of different cooperatives. And you know, sometimes social and traditional norms can affect the impact co-ops can have on female empowerment, whether that's through lack of access to education or lack of capital or lack of access to capital. It's a very, very tricky situation, and I don't know what the right answer is. But what I would say is it does help when women help support other women in cooperatives, and I think that's a huge onus on women in co-ops now and women in co-ops in the future. So about 8 or 9 years ago, there was an initiative that came about in the UK called the Cooperative Women's Challenge. And it was set up originally by the Cooperative Group, which is the largest retail society here. And that was resurrected, I guess, by the Co-op Group, by Cooperatives UK, by us at Co-op News, and by the Cooperative College, to really start asking some of these questions and revisiting it, and to encourage work towards equity and representation in democratic structures, and to increase the number of women in senior management roles. So we have a Facebook group now, if anyone wanted to join. Am I allowed to say? Is that okay?
Sure.
All right, we're just not to use cross promotion. So
Women in Cooperatives Facebook group. Yes, I'm a member.
There's the Women in Cooperatives Facebook group, and then also alongside that, parallel at the moment, the Co-op News and the Cooperative College are doing a series of webinars. And the first one was last week with Rebecca Harvey from aroundtheworld.coop. And Sarah was really interesting to talk to because she's visited cooperatives around the world. She's met a lot of very interesting co-ops and a lot of interesting women in cooperatives as well. So she gave some fascinating examples of how and why cooperatives have made a difference to women in their communities. And a lot of it is about equality and about equity and about making sure that women have their voices heard.
I guess there is also the gender division of labor in terms of the sectors where you will find women in cooperatives, like in social cooperatives and the education and healthcare. And then, especially in the global south, you have these women co-ops in handicrafts and in food processing, etc., that are coming out. And some people question, oh, can you have a woman-only co-op? Well, you know, that's what the context is, and hence you have them coming out. They're responding to a need. So you talked a little bit about this cooperative, being a cooperatively owned media group. What do you think now you have this new media issue, what do you think is the role that a cooperative ownership could play in developing independent media institutions at a time when all sectors are changing, but especially media, print media?
We've actually done an article on this issue, and it's really interesting because in the UK there are a couple of very, very interesting emerging media cooperatives. So 2 that immediately come to mind are the Bristol Cable, and the other one is the Meteor in Manchester. And what's interesting about both of those is they don't talk about cooperatives, but they are cooperatives. And by being owned by the community that reads them, it means that they're not beholden to any other political or socio-economic agenda, but actually they can dig into the stories that mean the most to their readership and to their members. I think that in the UK specifically, there has been a massive, massive problem about decentralisation. Their newsrooms have been disbanded and dispersed, and so someone might be writing a story about a local event in Manchester, but they might be living, 200 miles away, 300 miles away. So they'd have no idea about the context, no idea about actually what's happening at street level, and people don't have the time to write those stories. So hang on, what was I going to say? I think one of the problems with this and that decentralization is it can have a very, very significant and very negative knock-on effect on civil engagement. So one report I read on the decline of local newspapers linked the closure of titles to reduced election turnout, for example. So it has a direct correlation in terms of how people engage in their communities at an electoral basis.
Level.
Yeah, that's the word. Thank you. You wouldn't think I work with words, would you? It's fine. But what I would also say is that, as in the question of women's equality, while cooperation can help to develop an independent media institution, they're not always the right answer. Cooperatives are brilliant, but they're not always the right answer, and I think sometimes people in co-ops can forget that. Co-ops are amazing, don't get me wrong, but they're not perfect, and they're not always possible. And I think globally one of the problems is that media cooperatives haven't been able to offer members a real tangible return. And there have been media co-ops that have failed because of that, and because of the rise in digital media and the ease of access to information. You know, people can curate and create their own news stream, can't they, for family and friends? So you don't necessarily need someone else telling you the news when you get it elsewhere. So in Canada, for example, there was a Canadian newspaper business that started to fail, and it launched a fundraising campaign to save the titles at co-ops, and they did, and they worked. But the problem was COVID-19 hit just as the co-op got up and running. And now it's ceased all print editions and it's gone digital only. And although this was, the long-term plan, they've had to really accelerate that, and it hasn't necessarily been for the good. I think the media co-ops that are really successful have a core committed membership base, and they have a genuine purpose that chimes with those members, whoever those members might be.
And that, especially at a time when there is monopolization of media channels, and how do you get alternative news? And yes, you can keep digging from social media, but then all the algorithms that are at work in social media, how do you get independent news? Cooperative ownership could be a way for local journalism to be sustained in these times.
Absolutely. And I think that what I would also say is cooperative journalism and journalism about cooperatives isn't just a UK thing, and it's not an Anglophone thing either. Cooperative journalism is very well established in many countries around the world. Specifically, I wanted to mention Nepal and India. The media cooperatives there are outstanding, and the journalism is phenomenal. And I think what really shows there is that has had a direct impact on the growth of cooperatives, because the cooperative media is so strong. And that's fantastic.
And they would do good coverage of it. Finland, Greece, but often the times it's when the newspapers or the media outlets are in crisis, and they are letting go workers, journalists. Exactly. That's when often the I think media co-ops come about.
So
you mentioned,
sorry. I was going to say it's a tragedy when you lose those journalists, because it's not just the journalists that you lose, it's expertise, it's the institutional knowledge, it's the local regional knowledge that really make news valuable. And it's very frustrating.
You mentioned that you've had you covered the ILO Co-op cooperation section and its establishment. What do you think is, and you cover still to this day many news from the ILO, the International Labor Conferences, how cooperatives are reflected in international labor standards, etc. So you have been great at promoting the news on ILO and its work on cooperatives, mutuals, and other social solidarity economy organizations. So we thank you for that. What do you think is the value added of the ILO in relation to its work in promoting cooperation, solidarity, mutualism in these forms of organizations?
I think there's a huge amount of value, but I think one of the most valuable thing is that there's so much overlap, and I think it's that overlap where that value emanates from. The ILO plugs into this wider global community though that cooperatives can't, and I think that's going to be really, really important in terms of how it can advocate for cooperatives as well as mutuals and SSE organisations as well. The ILO has that capacity to be a wider and a greater voice to advocate that cooperatives can be an option. As I said, you know, at the very start, I didn't know what co-ops are. I wish I'd known. It'd been great. It saved me a lot of time, but I didn't. And I think that's just on, you know, a very, very personal level, but that can be extrapolated to the educational level, to the business level, to the international development level. And I think that's the point where the ILO can really add value to the cooperative movement. You know, it can help communicate to an audience above and beyond itself, much wider and to a much greater degree than any of those enterprises can do just on their own. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you for the partnership. Yes, and cooperative movement, of course, has a chair, has an observer status at the ILO, and a long-standing, of course, partnership, including, you know, recent memorandums of understanding that guide our partnership together. We are going through some challenging times, the unfolding crises around the pandemic, but also, you know, changes in the world of work, from climate-based displacement of people, and how technology is changing the way we work and live, aging society. So it's a lot of changes happening, and cooperatives, mutuals, and other social and solidarity economy organizations step in, of course, at the local level in responding to these challenges. How do you think they do that? And please pick and choose. I mean, whether it's from the COVID side, which you've covered quite a bit in Co-op News as well.
I think it's what COVID has really taught us is that there are things that are bigger than ourselves. And I think that goes for the cooperative movement, it goes for individuals, it goes for politics as well. So as well as like doing Co-op News, the magazine, what we also do is do some editorial and some design work for other organisations, mainly in the social enterprise and cooperative sector. And we've just finished a piece of work for the Cooperative Councils Innovation Network. And CCIN is a collection of councils who work together using cooperative principles to further activity in their local areas. And what was fascinating, looking at all those case studies, there's about 30, 35 in total, is the fact that none of these councils could have done the activity that they did on their own. It's always been about partnership working. And we've seen that throughout any kind of crises, not just COVID, but, you know, local flooding or local fires. People work together. When there's something that's slightly more important, people do come together. And I think that's what cooperatives do, and that's what they are. And I think people cooperate without knowing that's what they do. They do the cooperating without knowing they are being cooperative, if that makes sense. So that's been one real silver lining of this whole pandemic is how, you know, hyperlocal mutual aid groups have come together, how job retention schemes have worked from co-op to co-op. That cooperation among cooperatives has come through really strongly. But, you know, there's also been massive struggles, and as I said earlier, you know, co-ops aren't necessarily always the gold standard. They're not always the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You know, Outdoor Leisure Centre Outdoor Leisure Cooperative, REI in the US laid off workers and then sold its massive flagship beautiful headquarters as people switched home working. Then you've got also this the MAC, the Mountain Equipment Corp in Canada, which has been sold to a US private equity firm, and I know that at the time of recording that is still ongoing and they're waiting for a court judgment. But, you know, there's still a lot of frustration and a lot of negative things that are happening around cooperatives. I think so what was the rest of the question? Sorry, I went off on one then.
No, it was the context of crises and crisis response, and as you said, people come together during some times of crises. The solidarity, the mutualism really, you know, sees a great spurt. And then I guess the question is, yes, there are some sectors that are doing well, like retail, and cooperatives in like food retail are booming, but then others like in tourism or hospitality are suffering. And then there's these co-ops like social co-ops, health co-ops, education. Those in the caring business are facing a huge influx of needs, and how do they respond? And that's where partnership beyond co-ops, of course, becomes very critical. The partnership with local governments, national governments, and other private sector. Yeah. You were, I think, going to say something around what's a good starting point for, you know, co-ops to maybe emerge out of this crisis, like
how can they work? I think for co-ops specifically, I think that you need to work out what your cooperative difference is, and at the end of the day, your cooperative difference is you are a co-op because you agree with the cooperative values and principles. So returning to those principles are a really, really good starting point. And if you use those co-op values and principles as a checklist, it does start to make sense in terms of that being a good starting point for your response. So you know, the decisions you're making, are your members democratically involved in that? Are they being encouraged to participate economically if and where they can? Is there specific education or training you're doing for your members or other stakeholders that's specific to this situation? And are you cooperating with other co-op mutuals and social enterprise organizations? How are you serving your communities? I think if you use the cooperative values and principles as a starting point, that gives you a good grounding and a good framework from which to do all your other activity. And if you start with there, that's a really, really, really good thing.
Rebecca, thank you. This has been most interesting. I have one more question, and it's related to, because you do cover quite a bit international cooperative news, cooperative development news. How well is co-op news read or heard in these international circles? Of course, you're based in the UK, you are supported by UK, the cooperative movement in the UK, but how is your international outreach coverage also getting picked up by these different agencies, organizations, co-ops from around the world?
It is getting picked up, though as I said earlier, this is something we've never really focused on previously. We are doing a lot more work with the ICA at the moment. We're leading the comms consortium, doing the communications for the ICA's Congress, which is supposed to be being held in Seoul in South Korea next December, I think it is now. But we do get a lot of international readership as well. On our website, the news.coop, over half of the readers are from outside of the UK. I think 25% in total is from North America. Elsewhere, it's spread throughout the whole world. I think in the last time I looked at it, for the previous 12 months, we'd had visitors to our website from almost every single country in the world, apart from 4. And so, you know, there are people around the world who are interested in news about cooperatives, and we will continue to write about that. And as I said, I think it's really important to involve those people in the decision-making process in co-op news, to be members, to actually have a stake in their cooperative news.
And we'll continue following you and disseminating the stories and contributing to them as well. Thanks a lot for the good work and for sharing your thoughts with us, Rebecca.
Thank you so much.
Take care.